Teen goes missing at prom. Mom walks into Laundromat and sees. It's a story that starts like any other high school fairy tale. Bright lights, laughter, and the promise of unforgettable memories. But for Zoe Wilson, prom night wasn't just the end of her senior year. It became the beginning of a nightmare no one could have imagined. On what should have been one of the happiest nights of her life, Zoe vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions, fear, and an empty void in the lives of those who loved her. And then, weeks later, something happened that changed everything. A moment so shocking, so unexpected, that it sent ripples through a small town already teetering on edge. This is the story of how a mother's relentless determination uncovered secrets darker than anyone could have dreamed. Rebecca Wilson never thought she'd be standing in a laundromat, staring at a turquoise dress hanging on a rack, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet had been ripped away. For weeks, she'd been living in a haze of sleepless nights and endless searches, clutching flyers with her daughter's smiling face printed across them. She'd walked these streets countless times before, hoping someone would recognize Zoe or offer even the smallest clue about where she might be. But this time was different. As Rebecca's eyes locked onto that dress, the exact shade of turquoise Zoe had chosen for prom, now marred by dark stains that looked far too much like blood, her heart stopped. It couldn't be real, could it? Yet there it was, staring back at her like a ghost from the past, whispering truths she didn't want to hear but couldn't ignore. Zoe wasn't alone when she disappeared. Her date, Deshaun Johnson, vanished alongside her, and while some in the community whispered ugly rumors about him, Rebecca knew better. Deshaun was smart, kind, and fiercely protective. Not the person people were making him out to be. He had dreams of becoming an engineer, plans to make the world a better place. But none of that mattered once the whispers started. The media painted Zoe as the victim, the beautiful blonde cheerleader, while Deshaun faded into the background. His name barely mentioned, unless it came with suspicion. Rebecca fought against the tide of prejudice, desperate to keep both their names alive, because deep down, she believed they were still out there somewhere, waiting for someone to find them. The laundromat owner, Harold Donovan, seemed friendly enough at first glance, a middle-aged man with neatly combed hair and a polite smile. But when Rebecca asked about the dress, something shifted. His practiced calm faltered, just for a second, but long enough for her instincts to scream danger. "That dress belongs to a customer," he said smoothly, moving to take it off the rack and hide it behind the counter. But Rebecca wasn't buying it. Every fiber of her being told her this was Zoe's dress. And those stains weren't dirt or watermarks. They were evidence. Harold's nervousness only fueled her suspicions, and as she pressed him for answers, his demeanor grew, colder, more defensive. By the time Detective Morrison arrived, the dress was gone, picked up by its owner mere minutes after Rebecca left. Or so Harold claimed. But if it wasn't Zoe's dress, why did he seem so desperate to keep it hidden? What unfolded next was a series of events that tested Rebecca's resolve like never before. The police investigation stalled, bogged down by red tape and misplaced priorities. Meanwhile, Rebecca found herself questioning every shadow, every stranger, every detail that seemed even slightly out of place. Was she seeing connections that didn't exist, as some suggested? Or was she onto something the rest of the world refused to see? Her stakeout outside Sparkle Clean led her to a chilling discovery, a late-night meeting between Harold and Principal Robert Whitaker of Ridgemont High. Their exchange was cryptic, filled with veiled threat and promises of things being taken care of soon. When Whitaker handed over an envelope of cash and mentioned a package for tomorrow's pickup, Rebecca knew she was looking at pieces of a puzzle far bigger and far more sinister than she'd ever imagined. Principal Whitaker had always seemed like the picture of professionalism, a pillar of the community trusted by students and parents alike. But as Rebecca followed him to a secluded lake house, she began to unravel a side of him no one else had seen. Through the windows, she glimpsed a study transformed into a twisted shrine, its walls covered with photographs of female students, Zoe's face among them, larger and more prominent than the others. Some photos were candid shots, taken without her knowledge. Images of her walking to class, grabbing coffee with friends, practicing track. The realization hit Rebecca like a freight train. Whitaker hadn't just noticed Zoe. He'd been obsessively documenting her every move. And now, as she crept toward the basement window, drawn by faint sounds coming from below, she feared she was about to discover exactly how far his obsession had gone. When Rebecca finally saw her daughter again, sitting on a cot in a dimly lit basement, the relief was overwhelming, but short-lived. Zoe was alive, yes, but the weight of what she'd endured was written all over her face. She looked thinner, paler, her once vibrant spirit dulled by weeks of captivity. And then there was the question of Deshawn. Where was he? What had happened? To him? Zoe's voice trembled as she recounted the horrors of that night in the parking lot. The way Whitaker had turned violent, the blood staining her dress, the desperate attempt to save Deshawn as his life slipped away. But before Zoe could finish telling her story, footsteps echoed above them, growing louder, closer. Whitaker was back, and Rebecca realized they were running out of time. As the tension reached its breaking point, Rebecca faced a choice no parent should ever have to make: fight or flee. With Whitaker descending the stairs, knife in hand, and Zoe trembling behind her, she knew hesitation wasn't an option. Every ounce of fear, anger, and love for her daughter surged through her veins as she gripped the heavy desk lamp tightly in her hands. The seconds ticked by like hours, each sound amplified: the creak of the floorboards, the clink of metal, the shallow breaths of mother and daughter clinging to hope. Outside, distant sirens wailed faintly, growing louder with each passing moment. Whether help would arrive in time remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: Rebecca wasn't going down without a fight. And as Whitaker stepped into view, his expression cold and calculating, the final confrontation began. A battle not just for survival, but for justice, truth, and the chance to rewrite the ending of a story that had gone terribly wrong. But the what question remains: what happens next? Will Rebecca and Zoe escape unharmed, or will Whitaker's delusions lead to an unthinkable tragedy? And what secrets lie buried in the woods surrounding the lake house, waiting to reveal the full extent of his crimes? Stay tuned for the next chapter of this harrowing tale, where every answer brings new questions, and the line between hero and villain blurs with each revelation. The days following Rebecca's discovery of Zoe in Whitaker's basement were a blur of police interviews, hospital visits, and media attention. Yet even as the immediate crisis seemed to be resolving, the weight of everything that had happened pressed heavily on both mother and daughter. Zoe remained unusually quiet, retreating into herself whenever anyone asked about Deshawn or those terrifying hours after prom night. Rebecca could see the cracks beneath her brave exterior, the lingering fear in her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden noises. But she didn't push too hard. She knew healing wouldn't come overnight, not for either of them. Detective Morrison became a constant presence during this time, his earlier skepticism replaced by a fierce determination to ensure justice was served. He visited their home frequently, bringing updates on the investigation, while gently encouraging Zoe to share more details about what happened. Each new revelation painted a clearer picture of Whitaker's disturbing obsession. Journals filled with obsessive entries about Zoe, detailed plans he'd made for their future, and evidence of similar behavior toward other students over the years. It was horrifying to think how close they had all come to missing these signs, entirely if not for Rebecca's instincts and relentless pursuit of answers. Meanwhile, Harold Donovan's cooperation with authorities shed light on another layer of betrayal, his role as an accomplice, cleaning the blood-stained dress, staging the fake pickup, lying to protect Whitaker, left many in the community questioning who else might have turned a blind eye. Some residents expressed outrage, demanding accountability beyond just Whitaker and Harold. Others quietly admitted feeling complicit in the town's prejudices, particularly regarding Deshawn. Conversations shifted from whispers about Zoe's disappearance to open discussions about systemic biases and the importance of listening to marginalized voices. For Rebecca, watching the town grapple with its collective guilt felt like a small victory, though it did little to ease her own pain. Every mention of Deshawn's name brought fresh waves of grief, not only for the loss of such a promising young man, but also for the way his memory had been tarnished before the truth came out. At first, she avoided speaking publicly about him, unsure how to honor his sacrifice without reopening wounds, but Zoe insisted otherwise. Deshawn deserves to be remembered, she told her mother one evening, tears streaming down her face. Not just as my date or some tragic victim. He was so much more than that. That conversation inspired Rebecca to reach out to Deshawn's family, something she'd hesitated to do before now. When she finally met his parents, Marie and Charles Johnson, she found solace in their shared sorrow. Over cups of tea in their modest living room, they spoke openly about Deshawn, their pride in his achievements, their devastation at losing him, and their gratitude for Zoe's courage in seeking justice. Together, they began brainstorming ways to memorialize him properly, deciding on a scholarship fund for Ridgemont High students embodying the same values Deshawn represented: integrity, resilience, and compassion. As the weeks passed, preparations for Deshawn's memorial service consumed much of Rebecca and Zoe's energy. For Zoe, organizing the event became a form of therapy, a way to channel her grief into action. She spent hours writing and rewriting her speech. Determined to get every word right, Rebecca watched proudly as her daughter transformed her trauma into purpose, finding strength in honoring Deshawn's legacy. Still, there were moments when the weight of everything threatened to overwhelm her. Late at night, when the house fell silent, Rebecca would find Zoe sitting alone in the dark, staring blankly at nothing. On those nights, she'd sit beside her, holding her hand until sleep finally took hold. Back at the police station, Detective Morrison worked tirelessly to build an ironclad case against Whitaker. Evidence continued pouring in, painting an increasingly damning portrait of the principal's descent into madness. Security footage from Sparkle Clean confirmed Harold's involvement, showing Whitaker dropping off the dress the morning after prom. Text messages between the two men revealed cryptic exchanges about cleaning up and making things disappear. Most chillingly, investigators uncovered photos on Whitaker's computer of Zoe taken outside her home, at school events, even inside her bedroom. Images captured through windows or partially opened blinds. The violation of privacy hit Rebecca like a punch to the gut. How long had he been watching? And why hadn't anyone noticed? While the legal proceedings against Whitaker moved forward, tensions within the community reached a boiling point. Parents demanded stricter background checks for educators, while students organized rallies, calling for greater transparency and accountability in schools. Zoe became an unexpected voice in these efforts, addressing crowds with raw honesty about her experience. Her speeches resonated deeply, sparking conversations about consent, trust, and the need to dismantle harmful stereotypes. Yet despite her growing confidence, Zoe struggled privately with survivor's guilt. Why had she lived when Deshawn hadn't? What made her worthy of rescue? Rebecca saw the toll it was taking on her daughter and suggested therapy again, this time framing it as a tool rather than a weakness. To her relief, Zoe agreed to meet with Dr. Lyons, the counselor Morrison had recommended months ago. Their sessions provided Zoe with a safe space to process her emotions, though progress came slowly. One breakthrough moment occurred when Dr. Lyons encouraged Zoe to write letters to Deshawn. Words meant only for him, never to be read aloud. Through these letters, Zoe began confronting her feelings of guilt and fear, inching closer to forgiveness for Whitaker, for herself, and for a world that had failed them both. Amidst the chaos, one subplot simmered quietly in the background: Harold Donovan's fate. Though technically an accessory, rather than the mastermind behind the crimes, his actions had enabled Whitaker's depravity to go unchecked. Some argued he deserved leniency for cooperating fully with investigators. Others believed his betrayal warranted severe punishment. As news outlets debated his potential sentence, Rebecca found herself torn. Part of her wanted vengeance, not just for Zoe's suffering, but for Deshawn's death. Another part recognized the futility of hatred, knowing it wouldn't bring him back. Then came the day everyone had been waiting for: Whitaker's arraignment. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as reporters jockeyed for seats and spectators filed in silently. Rebecca and Zoe sat together near the front row, clutching hands tightly as Whitaker entered, handcuffed and flanked by officers. Gone was the polished educator who once commanded respect. In his place stood a broken man, his face pale, an expression hollow. Yet even now, traces of delusion lingered in his eyes, a stark reminder of the danger he posed. When the charges were read aloud: kidnapping, attempted murder, first-degree murder, the air grew heavy with emotion. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Zoe squeezed her mother's hand harder, her knuckles white. Rebecca leaned close, whispering reassurances. She barely believed herself. They weren't here for closure, she reminded Zoe. They were here for justice. But justice, it turned out, wasn't so simple. During the preliminary hearing, Whitaker's defense team argued diminished capacity, citing journal entries and psychological evaluations suggesting mental illness, while Morrison assured Rebecca and Zoe that these tactics rarely succeeded. The uncertainty gnawed at them. What if Whitaker walked free? What if the jury sympathized with his delusions instead of condemning his actions? These questions haunted them long after the hearings ended each day. And then there was the matter of Deshawn's body. Investigators had recovered it exactly where Whitaker claimed, buried hastily in the woods behind the lake house, the site of his final resting place. A shallow grave marked only by disturbed earth left Rebecca physically ill. Zoe refused to visit, unable to bear the thought of seeing it firsthand. Instead, she channeled her anguish into planning a proper burial, working closely with Deshawn's family to create a ceremony befitting the hero he truly was. As the trial loomed nearer, suspense mounted. Would the prosecution succeed in proving Whitaker's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? Could Zoe find the strength to testify against him? And most importantly, would the verdict bring any semblance of peace to those left behind? With each passing day, the stakes grew higher, drawing everyone inexorably toward a climax that promised resolution, or perhaps further heartbreak. The days following Deschamps' memorial service marked a turning point for the town of Ridgemont. Conversations that had once been hushed or tinged with prejudice now flowed openly, driven by Zoe's courage and the undeniable truth of what had happened. The scholarship fund in Deschamps' name quickly gained momentum, with donations pouring in from across the community. It wasn't just about honoring his memory. It was about ensuring that his values of integrity, compassion, and resilience lived on through future generations. Zoe threw herself into organizing the details, working closely with Deschamps' family to create something meaningful. For the first time since her rescue, she felt like she was doing something truly worthwhile. Meanwhile, Rebecca found herself reflecting on how much had changed, not just for her family, but for the entire town. The trial against Principal Whitaker and Harold Donovan loomed ahead, promising to bring further clarity and accountability. Yet, as satisfying as it was to see justice pursued, Rebecca couldn't shake the weight of everything they'd endured. She began attending counseling sessions with Dr. Lyons, something she'd initially resisted, but now realized she desperately needed. In those quiet moments of vulnerability, she allowed herself to grieve, not just for the week she'd lost with Zoe, but also for the innocence shattered by Whitaker's actions. Slowly, she started to rebuild her sense of self, finding strength not only in Zoe's recovery, but in the outpouring of support from their community. As the trial approached, Detective Morrison kept Rebecca and Zoe updated on every development. Evidence from Whitaker's journals and Harold's testimony painted an unflinching picture of obsession and complicity. Investigators revealed that Whitaker had targeted other students over the years. Though none of his previous fixations had escalated to violence, his arrest sent shockwaves through the education system, prompting statewide reviews of background checks and oversight policies for school administrators. Harold, facing reduced charges due to his cooperation, provided crucial context about Whitaker's methods, how he manipulated situations to isolate Zoe, how he planned to protect her after graduation. Every detail added another layer of horror to the nightmare they'd survived. The courtroom was packed on the day of Whitaker's sentencing. Parents, students, teachers, and members of the media filled the benches, all eager to witness the final chapter of this harrowing story. As the judge read out the verdict, life imprisonment without parole, the room erupted in a mixture of cheers and sobs. Harold received a 10-year sentence, a punishment some deemed too lenient given his role in covering up Deschamps' murder. Still, there was no denying that justice had been served. For Rebecca and Zoe, the verdict brought a sense of closure they hadn't thought possible. They clung to each other as the reality sank in. Whitaker would never hurt anyone again. After the trial, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Zoe returned to school part-time, determined to finish her senior year. Despite everything, her classmates rallied around her, offering support in ways both big and small. At graduation, she delivered a speech that left the audience in tears, not of pity, but of admiration. She spoke about survival, friendship, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it feels impossible. When she mentioned Deschamps, her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. Instead, she reminded everyone of the scholarship fund, urging her peers to carry forward the legacy of someone who had believed so deeply in making the world a better place. For Rebecca, watching Zoe walk across the stage to receive her diploma was bittersweet. She thought about all the milestones they'd almost missed, all the moments stolen by fear and violence. But she also saw resilience, a daughter who refused to let tragedy define her, who chose instead to rise above it. That evening, as they sat together under the stars, Rebecca asked Zoe if she ever thought about leaving Ridgemont, starting fresh somewhere else. Zoe shook her head firmly. "This is where Deshawn lived," she said simply, "and this is where I'll make sure people remember him." In the months that followed, the Deshawn Johnson Memorial Scholarship became a cornerstone of Ridgemont High. Its inaugural recipient was a junior named Jasmine Carter, a bright and compassionate student who volunteered tirelessly at local shelters. When Zoe presented Jasmine with the award during an assembly, the applause was thunderous. Standing beside her mother, Zoe felt a surge of pride, not just for herself, but for the ripple effect of change Deshawn's memory had inspired. Looking back, Rebecca often thought about the turquoise dress that had started it all. It hung in her closet now, cleaned professionally and pressed carefully, a symbol of survival rather than loss. Sometimes late at night, she'd pull it out and run her fingers over the fabric, remembering the strength it had taken to fight for Zoe's safe return. And while she knew the scars, both visible and invisible, would always remain, she also knew they were reminders of love, hope, and the power of persistence. As winter gave way to spring, the Wilsons found themselves visiting Deshawn's grave more often. Each time they brought flowers or left notes sharing updates about the scholarship fund. On one such visit, Zoe knelt beside the headstone and whispered, "You didn't die in vain, Deshawn. Because of you, things are changing." Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time, they weren't solely tears of grief. They were also tears of gratitude for a friend who had shown extraordinary bravery, for a community that had come together to heal, and for a future shaped by lessons learned the hardest way imaginable. And so, life moved forward, not perfectly, not without pain, but with purpose. The story of Zoe and Deshawn became a testament to the strength of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light can emerge. Their journey taught others to listen more closely, to act more boldly, and to cherish the connections that bind us together. In honoring Deshawn's memory, Zoe and Rebecca ensured that his sacrifice would inspire generations to come, a legacy written not in ink, but in hearts.